She leaned against the door, looking at me as if she knew exactly the effect it caused. And then she told me, without giving room for escape, that she had no excuses, that tonight I would be completely hers. I should have said no, looked away, closed the door with a polite smile, but I could only stare at her and wish she would walk across that entire corridor to me. The convinced straight man in the office now looked at me as if I was everything she always denied wanting. But let me explain exactly how it happened. I'm here, still shaking. Not from the cold. The apartment is too hot, actually. I'm shaking because some things in life just don't make sense until the moment they do. And when you do, God, when you do, it's as if the whole world reorganizes itself around you. Livia Bastos, 44 years old, boss, a woman who always spoke of men with that twinkle in her eyes, who commented on dates, who used the term straight as a flag planted on her chest. Livia, who tonight looked at me in a way I never imagined possible. You know those moments when you realize you were just living an incomplete version of yourself? That there was something dormant, waiting to be awakened by someone specific, at a specific time, with the right words. Well, it happened. And now I'm here, going over every second, every breath, every look we've exchanged over the past few months. Because I need to understand how a woman who has always defined herself in a certain way can suddenly look at me like that, as if I were water in the desert, as if she had spent her whole life thirsting for something she didn't even know existed. Maybe I should start at the beginning, for the day she arrived at the office and changed the atmosphere of everything. By the way her heels echoed in the hallways, announcing a presence you felt before you even saw her. But first, let me tell you something. I always knew I liked women. It wasn't discovery, it was recognition. How to recognize a song you already know, but are listening to for the first time in a different version. But I've always kept it private, almost too intimate to share in the workplace. Until she arrived, and suddenly, keeping secrecy became the hardest thing in the world. Because how do you hide the fact that someone completely disorients you just by walking into a room? If you're there on the other side of the screen, feeling this story, leave a like for me. Tell us in the comments where you are watching. I love knowing that I'm not alone this morning. And if you want to know how it all started, subscribe to the channel, because the story that follows will explain every detail of how we got here. It was on a Monday in March that she appeared. I was in my corner, reviewing a campaign, when I heard the sound of those jumps in the hallway. High, firm, paced heels. It was not a hurry. It was presence. He was someone who walks knowing that each step echoes with purpose. The door opened, and she entered. Livia Bastos, a name that I already knew from corporate emails, from the signature under the guidelines, from official communications. But seeing it in person, God, seeing it in person was completely different. She wore a gray blazer that looked like it was designed specifically for her body. Not too fair, not baggy, exact, as if elegance were a second skin. Her hair tied in a bun, low, which left some loose locks, framing her face. And that perfume, woody, with notes that came to you before she even got close. But it was the way she greeted me that caught me off guard. He held out his hand, steady hand, secure grip, and he looked me straight in the eye for a few seconds longer than would be normal, as if I were studying myself, cataloging myself, deciding something about myself at that very moment. She mentioned my name. He said he had heard about it. Very well, from my work. The voice was deep, paused, every word chosen carefully. And I, who am usually articulate, who deal with communication all day, could only smile and thank you, because there was something in the way she said my name that made my stomach tie a tiny knot. In the following days, I started noticing everything. In the way she drank coffee, always in the same cup, always 3 small sips before you actually get to work. In the way he organized the table, with each document in a specific position, pen always on the right. In the way he answered the phone, with that tone that looked more like a statement than a question. But, mainly, I noticed the way she looked at people. For the men in the office, the look was direct, professional, but with a certain openness, a subtle availability, as if there was room for something beyond work, if the opportunity arose. For women, the look was different, cordial, respectful, but with a safe distance, well-defined limits, never a second longer, never a proximity that could be misinterpreted, even with me. with me. The look lingered. Just a little more, but it took time, and there was something in it that I couldn't decipher. Curiosity, perhaps, or something that she herself did not understand. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things. That was my projection, my desire by creating signs where none existed. But then, little things happened that made me question my own certainty, like in Wednesday's meeting, when she had to go behind my chair to reach the window. Instead of excusing herself and passing quickly, she put her hand on the back of my chair, for 2, maybe 3 seconds, long enough for me to feel the warmth of her closeness, to realize that she was there. Stop, as if he were deciding something. Or on Friday, when he handed me a report and our fingers touched. It wasn't. Accident. She could have put the paper on the table. He could have given me away in any other way, but he chose to deliver it directly to my hand, and when our fingers met, she didn't immediately pull away. He stayed there, in that light touch, for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. That's when I realized that something was happening. Something subtle, almost imperceptible, but real. Like a conversation being held without words, through looks that lasted too long and touches that happened by chance with suspicious frequency. And me, I was completely lost. Because it's one thing to know that you like women. It's quite another thing to discover that a woman who has always come out as heterosexual is apparently interested in you in a way that even she doesn't seem to understand. It was like watching someone discover a new version of themselves in real time, and to be at the same time the reason and the witness of this discovery. Some nights I would stay awake, going over every interaction, every look, every gesture, trying to decipher if it was real or if I was seeing what I wanted to see, because the Livia of the office continued to be the same impeccable professional as always. He spoke of work, results, strategies. He maintained his posture, his tone of voice, the appropriate distance. But there were moments, small moments in which I captured something different, a breath that changed when I got close, a look that averted too quickly, a pause in the middle of a conversation, as if she had lost herself in her own thoughts, and I began to understand that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only person in that office trying to decipher signals that I shouldn't be picking up. But it was in the elevator that everything became impossible to ignore. The weeks went by, and a strange routine settled between us, a cautious dance of proximity and distance, of given and denied signs, of moments that seemed to mean everything and nothing at the same time. Livia continued to be the impeccable professional she always was. In the meetings, his posture was irreproachable. I discussed numbers, strategies, deadlines. His voice maintained that tone of authority that made everyone pay attention. But with me, there were nuances that I doubted anyone else could perceive, like the way she said my name. There was a tiny pause before pronouncing it, as if she were savoring the word. Or maybe I was imagining things. Or the way she always found reasons to stop by my desk, documents that needed to be delivered in person, information that by chance she wanted to confirm with me, small tasks that could easily be solved by email, but that always resulted in her walking to where I was. And there were the moments of silence. You know those moments when the person is talking to you, but suddenly stops in the middle of the sentence, as if he had lost himself in his own thought, or as if you were thinking of something completely different. This began to happen with a frequency that could not be a coincidence. She was explaining to me a new communication strategy, talking about reach and engagement, when he stopped in the middle of a word and stared at me, just looking at me, for 3, maybe 4 seconds that seemed like an eternity. And when I asked if everything was okay, she blinked like someone waking up from a dream and resumed the conversation, as if nothing had happened. But the most intense thing happened in the elevator. It was late afternoon on a Thursday. I was leaving when the elevator doors opened and she was there, alone. And suddenly, the space that used to be just a means of transport turned into an intimate capsule where each breath seemed amplified. She asked me which floor I was going to, although she knew perfectly well that I always went down on the ground floor. I answered the obvious, trying to sound casual. She pressed the button and stood there, leaning against the side wall, looking at me through the reflection of the metal doors. Not directly, by reflection, as if it were safer that way, less compromising. And I realized I was looking at her the same way, through reflection, observing every detail without seeming to be observing. The way she fiddled with the ring she wore on her right hand when she was thoughtful, the way she lightly bit her lower lip when she was concentrated. The elevator went down slowly, slower than usual seemed to me, and when we got to the ground floor, when the doors opened, none of us moved immediately. We stood there for a few seconds, as if we were waiting for something to happen. I left first, obviously, but before the doors closed, I turned to say goodnight, and I caught her looking at me. Not for the phone, not for the stock market, not anywhere that wasn't directly for me. And this time, she didn't look away when our eyes met. It was one of those moments that are engraved in the memory with an almost photographic clarity. The low sound of the elevator, the echo of my footsteps in the marble of the lobby, the expression on her face, between curious and confused, as if she herself did not understand what she was feeling. That night, I came home and spent an hour in the shower, trying to process what was happening, because one thing was certain, something was happening. It was no longer my imagination. They were no longer signs that I was making up. There was real, palpable attention growing between the two of us, but there was also a practical issue that could not be ignored. She was my boss, and more than that, she was a woman who always identified as heterosexual, a woman who, in informal office conversations, talked about past relationships with men, who mentioned dates, who used references that made her orientation very clear. What was happening to us challenged all of that, and I was sure she was just as confused as I was. Over the next few days, I noticed that she began to behave slightly differently, more professional, if that was possible, as if he were trying to establish a greater distance, to create clearer limits. But the looks kept happening. It was as if there were two versions of her coexisting in the same body, the Chief Livia, controlled and distant, and another version, more vulnerable, who appeared in unguarded moments and looked at me with an intensity that made my heart race. And I was trying to be respectful, professional, give her space to process whatever she was feeling. But at the same time, I couldn't stop noticing every detail, every subtle change in her behavior. It was around this time that the dreams began. Dreams where we talked about other things that I don't work on, where she laughed in a more loose, more true, where there were no hierarchies or previous definitions of who we were or what we could be, just two people discovering an inexplicable connection. I woke up from these dreams with a strange feeling in my chest, a mixture of desire and impossibility, because, as much as the signs were there, as much as something was clearly developing between us, I knew that the situation was too complex to be resolved easily. But the universe, apparently, had other plans. And then came the company's end-of-year party. The end-of-year party has always been that kind of corporate event that everyone attends out of social obligation, but that no one expects to be really fun. Standard buffet, background music, talk about work disguised as social interaction. I arrived thinking about staying for an hour, showing presents and leaving. She wasn't particularly excited. He had spent the whole week trying to keep his distance, respectful of Livia, being professional to the extreme, avoiding any situation that could be misinterpreted. But when I entered the hall and saw her, all my composure went down the drain. She was near the bar, talking to some directors. She wore a black dress that I had never seen before. It was neither provocative nor flashy. It was elegant, sophisticated, the kind of piece that hugs the body in the right way, without being obvious. Her hair was loose, falling in soft waves over her shoulders, and she wore a lipstick in a shade of red that made her lips look even more defined. But what really caught my attention was the way she laughed, a low, genuine laugh that I rarely heard in the workplace. For a moment, she seemed lighter, more herself, as if the party had allowed a more relaxed version of her to appear. I grabbed a glass of wine and watched from afar, trying to look casual, talking to colleagues, but fully aware of her every move. The way he gesticulated when he was explaining something, the way he tilted his head when he was listening carefully, the way her eyes sparkled when she genuinely had fun with something. And then, in the middle of the conversation I was having with the finance people, I felt someone lightly touching me on the arm. I turned around and she was there. She pronounced my name in a different, softer, almost intimate way. He asked me if I was having fun. I said yes. I lied shamelessly. I was only having fun for the last 5 seconds, since she had appeared next to me. She said she was fine, that I looked beautiful that night. Beautiful. She said I looked beautiful, not well-groomed or elegant. Beautiful. And there was something about her tone of voice that made this word sound like much more than a casual compliment among colleagues. We stood there talking about amenities, wine, music, colleagues, party talk, without depth. But there was a subtextuality in everything we said that made each word loaded with meaning. She was standing right next to me, closer than would be normal in a casual conversation. And whenever someone passed behind her, she would get even closer to give her space. In one of these moments, when she leaned over to say something in my ear because of the music, I felt her breath rub against my skin, and I swear it took a few seconds longer than it would have been necessary in that position, as if he were testing his own reaction or mine. She commented that the wine was good, very softly, close to my ear. But what I heard was much more than a comment about the drink. The night progressed, and I realized that somehow we both ended up gravitating towards each other. Even when we separated to talk to other people, we always found an excuse to come back. A comment on the work. One question. About the party. Any pretext to resume proximity. And then, something happened that left me completely baffled. I was at the bar asking for another glass of wine when one of the sales directors approached Livia. Carlos, a guy who has always had a reputation as a heartthrob in the office. Handsome, successful, one of those who naturally flirt with any interesting woman. He came close to her with that conquering smile, struck up a conversation, made some joke that made her laugh. And then, casually, he put his hand on her waist. Livia's reaction was instantaneous. It was not rude. It wasn't dramatic. She simply stepped back a step, gently removing his hand, with a polite but firm smile, the kind of retreat that makes it clear that there is no interest without creating unnecessary embarrassment. But what caught my attention was what happened next. She looked directly at me, as if he wanted to make sure I had seen it, as if my opinion or reaction mattered more than anything Carlos could offer. That's when I understood that something had definitely changed, that it was no longer a matter of ambiguous signs or dubious interpretations. There was something going on between the two of us that she was also acknowledging, even if she didn't know what to do with it yet. The rest of the night passed in a blur of conversations, laughter, and exchanged glances, but I was completely focused on her, in the way she moved around the room, always elegant, always composed, in the way he greeted people, cordial, but keeping a certain distance. In the way that every now and then our gazes met across the room and there was a silent communication going on. When the party started to disperse, when people started to say goodbye and leave, I also prepared to leave. I was already heading for the door when I felt a hand on my arm. It was her, obviously. He asked me if I was going by car. I replied that I would go by taxi. She offered a ride, said she was passing through my region. And there was the opportunity I didn't know I was waiting for. Being alone with her outside the work environment, without colleagues around, without the formality of the office, without the limitations that the professional environment imposed. I accepted, trying to sound casual, thanked. But inside I was completely alert, because something told me that this ride would be much more than just one. Convenient transportation. What happened in that car changed everything between us. Her car was exactly what I would expect. A black sedan, beige leather interior, impeccably clean. It smelled of new leather and her perfume. When we entered, the enclosed space intensified everything. The closeness, the tension, the acute awareness of each other's presence. She turned on the sound softly, jazzy, smooth. Nothing too specific, just a soundtrack suitable for the comfortable silence that settled between us. Because it was not an awkward silence. It was the kind of silence of two people who feel good in each other's company, even without words. The first few blocks passed with casual conversation. Comments about the party, about some colleagues, about how the end of the year always makes everyone a little nostalgic. But I could see that there was an underlying tension in everything we were talking about. At one point, she asked me if I had drunk enough. I admitted that a little more than usual. She said that too, more than she should have, considering she was driving. There was something about her admission that sounded like an advanced justification, as if she was preparing to attribute to alcohol anything that might happen that night. When we got to the front of my building, she stopped the car, but didn't turn off the engine. We sat there, as if none of us wanted that moment to end. Through the windshield, I could see the facade of my building, the illuminated windows of the apartments where people led normal, predictable lives. I thanked him for the ride, but made no mention of getting out of the car. She also didn't indicate that she wanted me to leave. It was then that she turned off the engine. The silence that followed was fraught with possibilities. I felt my heart beating faster, a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. There was something about to happen, some line about to be crossed. I started to say his name, not knowing exactly what I wanted. Say. She turned to look at me directly, and for the first time since we had ever met, I saw a vulnerability in her eyes that she had always kept hidden. As if all the defenses she built at work, all her professional composure, had been temporarily suspended. She told me she needed to tell me something. Her tone of voice was different, lower, more personal, as if we were sharing a secret. I asked what. She hesitated for a few seconds, as if he were weighing his words, deciding how much he would reveal. She told me that she didn't know what was happening to her, that she always knew who she was, always dated men, was always attracted to men, but with me it was different, that I disoriented her, made her question things that she was always sure about herself. It was a confession, an admission that she was also feeling what was between us, that it was not my imagination, nor a wrong interpretation of signs. Ambiguous. I started saying his name again. She continued, saying that she knew it was complicated, that we were co-workers, that she was my boss, and that he didn't even know what he was doing, what he was feeling. I only knew that when she was close to me, something in her awakened. Awakens. The word echoed in the air among us as an intimate confession. I asked her if she wanted to go upstairs, before she had even fully processed what she was saying. The question came naturally, as if it were the logical continuation of that conversation, of that moment. It was neither calculated nor premeditated. It was instinctive. She stared at me for a few seconds that seemed like an eternity. I saw the internal conflict happening in real time. The responsible woman fighting against the curious woman. The boss fighting the person. The convinced heterosexual, fighting against something that she herself could not define. Finally, she said she shouldn't. I asked her if she wanted to. Another pause. Longer this time. She said she wanted to. 2 words that changed everything. We went up in silence. In the elevator, we were each in a corner, as if we were trying to keep a safe distance, until we decided definitively what we were going to do. But I felt the attention growing with each passing floor. When I opened the door of the apartment, she entered slowly, observing the environment. It wasn't the first time someone had visited my space, but it was the first time I felt so aware of every detail through the eyes of another person. I offered water, coffee, wine. She said she thought she had drunk enough that night, that the water was fine. I went to the kitchen to get water for the 2 of us, more to have a few seconds to process what was happening than out of real need. When I returned, she was standing by the window, looking out over the city. She praised the view. I commented that it was one of the reasons why I chose that apartment. I handed her the glass of water. Our fingers touched again, as they had in the office several times. But this time, she didn't move her hand away immediately. He let the touch remain, as if he were testing his own reaction. She told me that I needed to know that she had never done this before. I tried to joke, asking if she was referring to going up to an employee's apartment to relieve some tension. She smiled, but shook her head. He explained that he had never felt that for a woman before. There never was. Questioned about his orientation, he was never curious. Even me. Her honesty was almost painful, vulnerable, and brave at the same time. I told her that I didn't need to define anything that night, that I didn't need to label or explain, that sometimes things just happen. She felt as if my words had relieved some internal pressure. And then, slowly, she approached me. And then, she did something that neither of us expected. She approached slowly, as if she was giving me time to back off, for either of us to change our minds. But I didn't want to back down. He didn't want to change his mind. I wanted to know what it would be like. I wanted to find out if the tension between us would translate into something real when we finally allowed it to happen. We stopped a few centimeters from each other, close enough that I could see every detail of her face. The way her lips were slightly parted when she was nervous. The little expression lines around her eyes that appeared when she genuinely smiled. The way his pupils were slightly dilated, either from alcohol or from the situation. She said my name as a whispered question. And then, in a movement that seemed both impulsive and inevitable, she raised her hand and touched my face. That's all. A gentle touch, with my fingertips tracing the line from my cheek to my chin. It was the simplest touch in the world, and at the same time, the most intense I had ever felt. because there was so much hesitation in that gesture, so much vulnerability, that every second she kept her hand there felt like an eternity of discovery. She was allowing herself to feel something she had never experienced before, and I was witnessing this moment of inner revelation. I closed my eyes instinctively, surrendering completely to that sensation. I felt it as she got a little closer, when her breath got closer to mine. Face. She mumbled that it was madness, but without moving her hand away. I nodded in a whisper, but said that maybe it was the right kind of madness. I opened my eyes and found hers. There was a mixture of fear and desire in her eyes that made me understand that we were about to cross a line that would have no return. Not just a professional or social line, but a personal, internal line, which would change the way she saw herself. And then she did something that neither of us expected. He leaned over and kissed my forehead. Soft, time-consuming, almost reverent. It wasn't a romantic or sexual kiss. It was a kiss of recognition, as if she were sealing something, taking something on for herself. As she walked away, I saw tears shining in her eyes. She quickly apologized, running her hand over her eyes, saying she didn't know what. I interrupted gently, saying that she had nothing to apologize for. We stood there, in the middle of the living room, processing what had happened. There was an intimacy in the air that went far beyond the physical. It was emotional, vulnerable, raw. She said she should go, after a few moments, but without moving. I agreed that she should, also without making any gesture to facilitate her departure. The silence stretched between us, loaded with everything that was not being said, with everything that had been revealed in those few minutes, with the recognition that something fundamental had changed between us. I called softly. When she finally made mention of heading for the door, she asked me what. He said that she didn't need to be afraid of what she was feeling. Not with me. She looked at me with an expression that mixed gratitude and confusion. He replied that he knew, that he just needed time to process all that. He said I understood. And I really understood. Because it's one thing to be sure about your sexual orientation forever. It's quite another thing to find out at age 44 that maybe you didn't know yourself as well as you thought. She approached the door, hesitated for a moment, then turned to me once more. She thanked me for having received it, for being patient, for not making it more complicated than it already was. He said she didn't need to thank him. She insisted that she did, because that, what had happened there, had been important to her, even if he still didn't fully understand. And then, she left, leaving me alone in the apartment with the echo of her presence in every corner. I stayed up late that night, going over every second, every word, every look. Her touch still seemed to echo on my skin. The vulnerability she had shown was etched in my memory as something precious and fragile. I knew that the next day, at the office, she would probably try to act as if nothing had happened. Professional, distant, controlled. It was her way of dealing with situations that destabilized her. But I also knew that something had been awakened in her. Something that could not be simply ignored or repressed. And I was right. But on Monday, she did something that caught me completely off guard. Monday arrived loaded with a tension that you could feel in the air. I arrived at the office with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness, not knowing how she would react to seeing me, how we would both deal with what had happened. The answer came quickly. She decided to act as if nothing had happened. Not just as if nothing had happened, as if I was invisible. Throughout the morning, she avoided any eye contact with me. At the meetings, he addressed everyone in the room except me. When I needed information I asked someone else to look for it. It was as if I had ceased to exist in her professional world. Initially, I thought it was his way of processing the situation, an attempt to create distance to understand one's own feelings. I could accept that. It could be patient. But as the days went by, the situation only got worse. She began to actively avoid any situation where we would be alone. If I walked into a room and found myself there, I would find an excuse to leave. In the elevator, he always found company or waited for the next one. It was as if my presence was a threat to her composure. And worse, she went back to talking about men. In casual conversations at the cafe, she commented on an acquaintance who had invited her to dinner. It mentioned how open I was to new possibilities in my personal life. She was talking about an ex-boyfriend who had resumed contact, as if she were reaffirming her heterosexuality to herself and to everyone around. It was painful to watch. not only because I felt her absence in an almost physical way, but because I realized the internal conflict she was experiencing, the way he forced those comments, as if he were trying to convince himself of something that was no longer so right. 2 weeks have passed from this form. 2 weeks of professional distance, of averted looks, of conversations that took place through third parties. 2 weeks where I oscillated between respecting the space she needed and feeling a growing frustration with the situation. But I noticed things. I noticed that, despite avoiding direct contact with me, she always knew where I was in the office. If I went out to lunch, she casually appeared in the pantry a few minutes later, as if checking on my absence. She stayed late, she stayed too, working on things that could easily be done the next day. I noticed that when she talked about the men who were supposed to be in her life, her eyes discreetly sought my reaction, as if my opinion or my feelings on the subject mattered more than she would like to admit. And above all, I noticed that the tension between us, instead of decreasing with distance, only increased. It was like trying to ignore an elephant in the room. How much? But she pretended that there was nothing between us. The more obvious was the existence of something, the way his body tensed when I passed by, the way her voice was slightly more formal when she needed to address me, the way she held her breath in the few seconds our eyes accidentally crossed. It was on a Thursday that I decided I couldn't take it anymore. She was in the meeting room, alone, reviewing some reports. I knocked on the door and I entered without waiting for permission. He said we needed to talk. She looked up from the papers, and for a split second saw a familiar vulnerability before the professional mask came back into place. He replied that if it was about work, I could talk. If it wasn't, we wouldn't have anything to talk about. The coldness in her voice hurt more than I expected, but it also gave me the courage to be direct. I said she knew it was about work, yes, about how that embarrassing environment was affecting our productivity, about how she was creating an untenable situation in the office. It was a professional argument for a personal issue, a way to force her to listen to me using the language she allowed herself to accept. She sighed, put the papers aside, and looked at me directly for the first time in weeks. He asked me what I wanted. I said I wanted her to stop treating me like I was contagious, that I wanted her to recognize that we were two adults, professionals who could handle complex situations without creating unnecessary drama. She repeated my words, complex situations, with a tone that I couldn't decipher. I explained that it was situations where perhaps we would have felt a connection that goes beyond the professional, but where we can keep things civilized and mature. There was a long pause. She studied me as if she were trying to decipher something. He asked me if I thought that was what we were doing, being mature. Said I was trying to be, that she is the one who was behaving like a teenager who was caught doing something forbidden. It was a deliberate provocation, and it worked. She got up abruptly from her chair, walked to where I was, and stopped very close. Close enough that I could smell that familiar scent, so that I could see the intensity in her eyes. He told me in a low voice, almost in a whisper, that I didn't understand what was happening to her, that she had spent 44 years of her life knowing exactly who she was, what she wanted, how it worked. And then I showed up and asked, and what? She went on to say that she suddenly didn't know anything else. I didn't know what I was feeling. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know how to deal with it, and it scared her in a way I couldn't imagine. Her raw honesty completely disarmed me. I saw the vulnerable woman behind the controlled executive, the confused person behind the boss holds. I started to say his name. She interrupted me, shaking her head. He told me not to say anything, because if I said something kind at that moment, if I was understanding, she would do something stupid that we would both regret. It was a confession disguised as a warning, a way of telling me that she still felt everything she had felt that night in my apartment, but that he was fighting it with all his strength. I said softly that I wouldn't say anything kind, so that would only say that she didn't have to decide anything that day. I didn't need to define anything, label anything, solve anything. He just needed to stop treating me as if I were his enemy. She nodded slowly, as if she was agreeing with more than just my words. He said he could try that. I replied that it was all I was asking for. And then, unexpectedly, she smiled. A small, almost shy, but genuine smile. He told me that I was very persistent. I confirmed that it was, especially when it came to things that mattered to me. The implicit meaning of my words hung in the air between us. I was saying, without saying it, that she mattered to me, that what was between us mattered. And from the way she looked at me, I knew she had understood perfectly. But it was on a Friday, working late, that everything changed definitively. The following weeks brought palpable relief to the office environment. Livia returned to treating me with professional normality. Not the intimacy of that night in my apartment, but also not the hostile coldness of the previous days. We talked about work, exchanged ideas in meetings, maintained a respectful cordiality, but the tension was still there, subtle, controlled, but present. It was as if we had established a tacit agreement. We could coexist professionally, but we were not going to touch on the subject of what had happened between us. It was a delicate but functional balance, until that Friday. It was late afternoon, and most people had already left. I was finishing a report that I needed to turn in on Monday, when I realized that she was also still in the office. Her living room light was on, and I could hear the low sound of the printer running. Normally, I would have left without saying anything, respecting the space we had established. But there was something about that night, maybe the tiredness of the week, maybe the more relaxed atmosphere of the office, empty, that made me decide to stop by her office to say goodbye. I knocked lightly on the half-open door. I asked her if she wanted me to turn off the lights in the pantry when I left. She looked up from the computer screen. She looked tired, but there was something else on her face. A tension that was not only from work. He thanked me and said that he would also leave in a few minutes. I was about to say goodbye and leave when she asked me to come in for a minute. He said he wanted to show me a thing. I entered the room. She pointed to the computer screen where there was an open presentation. He asked me what I thought of that approach to the Johnson & Associates project. I got closer to see better. It was a project that we had been developing together for a few weeks. The proposal was good, but there were some adjustments that could improve it. I started making suggestions, pointing to different slides. She listened attentively, taking notes, occasionally agreeing or questioning some point. It was a purely professional conversation, but there was something about the atmosphere that wasn't just work. Maybe it was the fact that we were alone in the office. Perhaps it was the lowest light at the end of the day. Or maybe it was simply the fact that for the first time in weeks, we were talking naturally, without the forced tension that had hung over us. She agreed with one of my suggestions, saying that, as always, my ideas improved everything. He saved the changes. There was something in her tone of voice that made me look at her more closely. It wasn't just a professional compliment. There was a genuine, almost personal admiration. I thanked him, moving away from the table a little. But instead of going back to her chair, she stood up too. And suddenly we were standing very close to each other, in the small space between the table and the bookshelf. She said my name with that tone that I already knew, the tone that indicated she was about to reveal something important. Asked, "What?" She told me that she had thought a lot about that night, about what happened, what she felt. My heart raced. Wasn't it a conversation I expected to have there, at that moment, in that place? Asked. And she went on to say that she thought she was running away, not from me, but from herself, of what he discovered about himself. There was a vulnerability in her voice that made me understand that this was not a casual conversation. It was a revelation, a decision she had made. I asked her what she had discovered. She hesitated for a few seconds, as if gathering her courage. He told me that he had discovered that perhaps he did not know himself as well as he thought, that perhaps some certainties she had about herself were not as solid as she believed. It was the closest confession she could make at that moment. A way of admitting that her sexual orientation was perhaps not as definitive as she had always thought. I asked her if that scared her. She admitted that she terrified her, with a low laugh, but she said she knew what scared her the most. I asked what. She replied that it was the idea of not exploring this, the possibility of always wondering if the air between us has become charged again. That family tension, but this time accompanied by something that was not present that night in my apartment. Decision. I started to say his name. She interrupted me, saying that she knew it was complicated, that he knew that there were professional issues involved, that could go wrong in 1,000 different ways, but that he could no longer pretend that there was nothing between us. It was all I wanted to hear, and everything that terrified me at the same time, because it was one thing to fantasize about the possibility. It was another thing to have to deal with the complex reality of what a relationship between the two of us would mean. I asked her what she was proposing. She said she didn't know. Honestly, I didn't know. I just knew that I didn't want to avoid myself anymore. He no longer wanted to feign indifference when he felt the exact opposite. She got one step closer. We were pretty much the same distance that night in my apartment, but this time, there was a determination in her that wasn't present before. I asked her if she felt the opposite of indifference. Instead of responding with words, she did something that caught me completely off guard. He raised his hand and touched my face again, but this time, he was not hesitant. It was decided, deliberate. She traced the line of my cheek with her thumb, looking me in the eyes with an intensity that made my legs weak. He asked me if that answered my question. He said that if we did that there, now there would be no turning back. She said she knew. I asked her if she was sure. Instead of answering, she leaned over and did something neither of us had dared to do yet. He kissed me. It was smooth at first, tentative, as if she were still testing her own reaction. But when I responded, when I made it clear that I wanted it as much as she did, the kiss became more intense, more urgent. It was as if weeks of pent-up tension were being released all at once. All the furtive glances, all the accidental touches, all the attraction we had tried to ignore or deny was there, concentrated in that moment. When we parted, we were both out of breath. She whispered, "My God," leaning her forehead against mine. I agreed, still processing what had just happened. We stood there in the empty office, looking at each other as if we were seeing each other for the first time. And maybe we were. Perhaps that was the first time we allowed ourselves to see, without filters, without defenses, without fears. I asked, "Now what?" She smiled, a smile unlike any I had ever seen on her. Freer, more true. I said that now I would go home, and she would go to her house, and that the next day we would talk about what that meant. I asked, what if I didn't want to go home? What if I wanted her to come with me? The question came out before I could censor it. Direct, blunt, loaded with everything I was feeling. She looked at me for a few seconds, and I saw the exact moment she made the decision. He said that then, he thought he would have to accept my invitation. And here we are, back to the moment where it all began. Livia leaned against the door of my apartment, looking at me as if she knew exactly the effect it caused, and then telling me, without giving room for escape, that she had no excuses, that night I would be completely hers. But now you know how we got here. They know every look exchanged, every moment of hesitation, every step that has brought us to this point of no return. When she said those words, when she declared that I would be hers that night, it was not arrogance, nor possessiveness. It was recognition that there was something among us that was bigger than our fears, our uncertainties, our attempts to rationalize the irrational. I approached her slowly, crossing the corridor of the apartment, as if I was walking towards my own destination. And maybe he was. I asked, "Yours?" She answered, "Completely." And then she did something that definitively sealed any possibility of going back. He put both hands on my face and kissed me with an intensity that had not been present even in that kiss in the office. It was a kiss of vindication, of surrender, of someone who had finally stopped fighting herself and decided to allow herself to feel everything she had denied for weeks. When we parted, we were both panting. I started to say her name, which she was sure of, because once we crossed that line, she interrupted me, placing a finger gently over my lips. She told me that she had spent weeks trying not to cross that line, trying to be sensible, rational, well-behaved, and she asked me if I knew where it had taken her. I nodded, indicating that I hadn't. She went on to say that it took her through the sleepless night, thinking about me, questioning everything she thought she knew about herself, realizing that sometimes the only sensible thing to do is to stop trying to be sensible. There was a raw truth in those words that made me understand that she had reached a point of no return internally, that the struggle she was waging with herself had come to an end, with the victory on the side, that she wanted to allow herself to feel. I took her hand and took her inside the apartment, not in a hurry, not with desperate urgency, with the awareness that we had time, that moment deserved to be lived fully. I asked her if she wanted anything, wine, water. She replied that she wanted only me. Her honesty, the direct way she expressed her desire, made me understand that it was no longer the time for hesitations or social protocols. She had arrived there after a complex internal process and was now completely surrendering to what she felt. I approached her again, but this time, I was the one who took the initiative to kiss. And it was as if all the fantasies I had suppressed, all the possibilities I had imagined, were finally coming true. She responded with a passion that surprised me. For someone who was discovering this part of herself, there was a naturalness to every gesture, every touch, that made it seem as if it had always been dormant inside her, waiting just for the right moment to awaken. At one point, she whispered against my lips that she had never imagined. I asked what. She said it could be like that she could feel so right, and that was the word. Sure. No matter what complications might arise, no matter the professional or social issues. In that moment, in that intimate space we had created, everything made sense in a way that defied any logic. What happened next was a mutual discovery, her discovering a new facet of herself, a new way of feeling pleasure and intimacy, me discovering what it was like to be with someone who gave himself so completely, so vulnerably, and courageously to a completely new experience. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, almost spiritual. The intensity of sharing with someone the moment of such an intimate discovery about herself created a connection that went far beyond physical desire. When we finally surrendered completely, when we allowed the accumulated tension of months to turn into true intimacy, it was as if the outside world had ceased to exist. There was just the two of us, discovering together uncharted territories of desire and connection. The way she reacted to each caress, the genuine surprise in her eyes when she discovered new sensations, the way she completely surrendered to the experience. All of this made every moment precious, unique, and repeatable. At a certain point, she began to say that it was, but he didn't finish the sentence. I asked, "What is it?" She replied, "It's everything I didn't know I was missing." And in those words, there was a painful and beautiful recognition at the same time. Painful because it implied that she had spent years of her life depriving herself of something fundamental. Beautiful because it indicated that she had finally found a part of herself that she did not know existed. The dawn advanced, and we got lost in each other, not only in the bodies, but in the vulnerabilities, in the whispered confessions, in the shared discoveries. She told me about her insecurities, about how she always felt different, without knowing why. I shared my own journey of self-acceptance, the loneliness I sometimes felt about keeping that part of me private. And when we finally fell asleep, entwined in the bed that had become witness to a transformation, I knew that nothing would be equal again, not only between the two of us, but within each of us. Because some nights aren't just nights, they're milestones. They're moments that divide your life into a before and after, even if you don't realize it until the next morning. I woke up before her the next morning. For a few seconds, I lay down without moving, processing the reality of what had happened. Livio was next to me, still sleeping, the hair spread on the pillow. His face relaxed and free of the tensions he always carried in the work environment. There was something almost surreal about seeing her there. The executive always composed, always controlled, vulnerable in sleep, as if all the defenses she had built during the day had been temporarily suspended. When she opened her eyes and found me watching, I saw a rapid sequence of emotions pass through her features. Initial confusion, gradual recall, and then a small, almost shy smile. She said hi softly. I replied in the same way. We stayed like this for a few minutes, just looking at each other, as if we were trying to decipher what the daylight would do to what had happened in the intimacy of the night. I asked her how she was feeling. She considered the question for a few seconds before answering. He said he felt different, as if he had discovered a room in his house that he didn't know existed. The analogy was perfect. It was exactly that, the discovery of a part of herself that had been there all along, but had never been explored. I asked if this was good or scary. She honestly replied that it was both, but mostly good, very good. She moved closer to me in bed, and I felt again that intense chemistry that had dominated us the night before. But there was something different now, less urgency, more intimacy, as if we had earned the right to explore that connection without haste. She told me she needed to tell me something. I asked what. She told me that the night before, what happened between us was the first time in her life that she felt completely present during intimacy, completely herself. The confession was like a punch in the stomach, so intense and unexpected. I asked her what she meant by that. She sighed, as if she was gathering the courage for an even deeper revelation. She explained to me that she always thought there was something wrong with her. In all of her previous relationships, as much as she liked the person, as much as she wanted it to work, there was always a part of her that was disconnected, as if she were playing a role, living the life she was expected to live. I felt my heart tighten with the vulnerability of those words. I asked if the night before it had been different. She said it was completely different, that for the first time she was whole, present, true. She paused, searching for the right words, and told me that it was as if she had spent her whole life eating food without salt, thinking it was just like that. And the night before, I had shown her what real taste should look like. The metaphor moved me in a way I didn't expect, because there was so much relief in her voice, so much recognition, as if she had finally found an answer to a question that had been bothering her for years, without her knowing how to formulate it. I started to say his name. She interrupted me, saying that she knew it was a lot to process, for both of us, that he knew it had professional implications, that he could complicate everything, but that he couldn't pretend that it hadn't happened. She couldn't pretend that she hadn't changed something fundamental about her. I approached her and kissed her forehead softly, just as she had done that first night in my apartment. She said that no one was asking her to pretend anything. She asked me how I was feeling about all that. It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest answer. I said I was feeling like I had witnessed something very special, not only what happened among us, but her discovery about herself, that it was a privilege to be present at the moment when someone is in this way. She smiled, and there was a lightness to her expression that I had never seen before, as if a weight she had been carrying for years had finally been removed. I admitted that I was scared too. She asked of what. I explained that I was afraid of what it meant to us, for our work, for how people would react if they found out, and mainly that he was afraid that she would wake up one day and decide that it was just a phase, a momentary confusion. It was my own vulnerability being exposed. The fear that her discovery was temporary, that she would return to the heterosexual world she had always known, leaving me with the memory of those nights as something precious but finite. She looked at me with a seriousness that made me understand that she had considered this possibility as well. He told me he couldn't promise it would be easy, that he could not guarantee that he would not have moments of insecurity or confusion, that discovering this part of herself at 44 wasn't exactly simple. My heart tightened. But she went on to say that she could promise that what she felt the night before, what she discovered about herself, was neither confusion nor phase. It was recognition. It was like coming home after being lost. For a long time. Her words were like a balm for all my insecurities. I asked about the work, about the practical complications. She said we would find out together. That maybe we had to be discreet at first. Maybe we had to deal with some difficult situations, but that she didn't want the fear of what could happen to stop her from living what she was feeling now. It was exactly what I needed to hear. Not a guarantee that it would be easy, but a compromise, that she was willing to face the difficulties. We spent the rest of the morning talking, planning, discovering. She told me about signs from the past that now made sense, attractions to women that she always rationalized as admiration, relationships with men who always seemed to be missing something, a constant feeling of not being fully living your own life. I shared my own journey, the challenges of keeping that part of me reserved in the environment, professional, the fear of judgment, but also the freedom that comes with self-acceptance. When she finally got ready to leave, after all, it was Saturday and she had appointments, there was an intimacy between us that went far beyond the physical. It was the intimacy of two people who had shared not only their bodies, but their deepest vulnerabilities. She asked me if she could see me again, outside the office. There was a lovely shyness to the question that made me smile. I replied that after the night before, did she really think I was going to let her get away so easily? She laughed. A free, genuine laugh, completely different from the restrained laughter I knew from the work environment. He asked me about dinner that night, in a place where we could talk without worrying about who might see us. He said he would love to. And then, she kissed me one more time before leaving, but it wasn't a goodbye kiss. It was a kiss of promise, of continuity, of recognition that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. After she left, I was alone in the apartment that still kept her perfume in every corner. I mentally went over everything that had happened. From that first day, she arrived at the office to that morning of mutual discovery, and I realized that sometimes life surprises us in ways we never imagined possible. That sometimes the people we think we know keep mysteries even of themselves. That sometimes love, and yes, me, was beginning to recognize that this was what it was all about. It appears in ways that defy all our expectations and definitions. Livia had discovered a new version of herself through me. But what she may not have known is that I had also discovered something new about myself through her. I had discovered what it feels like to be chosen not only for what you stand for, but for what you awaken in someone. What it's like to be a part of a person's journey of self-discovery. That afternoon, as I was preparing for our dinner, I looked in the mirror and saw a different woman than the one who had gone to work on Friday. A woman who had been not only desired, but chosen. A woman who had helped someone find themselves, and in the process had found a new version of herself as well. The phone rang. It was her. She said she just wanted to thank me. I asked for what? For having patience with her, for not giving up when she was confused, for helping her discover who she really was. I said she didn't need to thank me for that. She insisted that she did, because I had given her the greatest gift anyone can give to someone else. I had helped her find herself. And there, in that moment, I knew that no matter what the future held for us, no matter what challenges we might face, that experience had changed both of us forever. Being chosen had never had this taste. It had never been so profound, so transformative, so true. And I knew that this was just the first page of a story that was still being written. And today, 6 months later, I can say that today is any Tuesday morning, and I'm having coffee in the kitchen of the apartment. Our apartment now, when I hear the familiar sound of her heels in the hallway. But it is no longer the sound of someone who announces his presence by authority. It is the sound of someone who is coming home. She greets me, calling me my love, kissing me before even putting the bag on the table. My love. Words that now come naturally from her lips, without hesitation, without fear, without the need to look around to see if anyone is listening. A lot has changed in these 6 months. Professionally, we made the decision that I would be transferred to another department, not because of external pressure. In fact, we were pleasantly surprised at how little drama our revelation caused in the office. But why did we want our relationship to have room to grow without the complications of professional hierarchy? Personally, watching Livia discover and fully embrace this new version of herself has been one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. She went through moments of insecurity, days when I questioned whether I was making the right decisions, nights when I needed to talk about the changes I felt internally, but I've also seen it flourish in a way I never imagined possible. The controlled and slightly tense woman in the office gave way to someone lighter, more authentic, more whole, as if she had finally stopped fighting herself and decided to just be. I ask how the meeting with the new customers went the day before. She says it was better than she expected, that he thinks they closed the contract. He pauses and looks at me with that smile that is now only mine. Ask me if I know what's funny. I ask what. She tells me that she feels more confident professionally now, as if stopping repressing a fundamental part of who she was had freed up energy for other areas of life as well. It's true. She is more creative, bolder in her proposals, more present in her interactions. It is as if personal authenticity has unlocked potentials that were dormant. We finished breakfast and got ready for another day. She goes to her office, I go to mine. We will meet again at night, as we do every day. Now, it is a simple domestic routine, which 6 months ago would have seemed impossible for both of them. But before we leave, she pulls me into a longer hug. He tells me he needs to tell me something. I ask what? She tells me that the day before, in a conversation with her sister, she commented on how Livia looked more like herself lately. And when her sister said that, she realized it was true, that she was more herself now than she ever was in her entire life. I feel my eyes fill with tears, because this is perhaps the greatest declaration of love that anyone can make. Say that you help the person become who they really are. She asks me if I know why. I ask why. She goes on to say that because I saw her before she even saw herself, that I recognized something in her that she was denying, and I had the patience to wait for her to come to the same conclusion. I begin to say his name. She interrupts me gently, asking me to finish. She says I gave her the time she needed to prosecute, the space she needed to grow, and the security she needed to transform. And now she wants to give me something too. I ask what? She pulls back a little and looks me straight in the eyes. She says she wants to give me her whole life, that he wants to build a future with me, that wants me to be the first person she sees when she wakes up and the last when she sleeps, who wants to share dreams, fears, achievements, failures, Who wants to grow old by my side, discovering new versions of ourselves every day? It was not a formal marriage proposal, but it was something even deeper. It was a total commitment, a complete delivery, a recognition that what we had transcended any category or definition. I answer that I want to give her the same thing, that I want to be your companion in everything, your partner in every discovery, your emotional home whenever you need it. We kissed right there, in the kitchen of the apartment, in the middle of a random Tuesday morning. Nothing else. There was a common thing at that moment. It was another milestone. One more confirmation that some love stories are also stories of self-discovery, of growth, of mutual transformation. When we finally part, she smiles the way it still makes my heart race. Ask me if I know what she discovered in these 6 months. I ask what? She tells me that she discovered that being chosen by me was just the beginning, that the best thing is to choose back, every day, consciously, completely. And there it was, the perfect definition of what we had built together. Not just a sudden passion or an isolated discovery, but a daily, conscious, profound choice. Being chosen had never had this taste. And now I know why. Because being truly chosen is not about being desired in a moment of impulse. It's about being recognized, valued, prioritized every day. It's about awakening in someone not just desire, but the will to become the best version of yourself. If you have come this far with me on this journey, thank you very much. I know it was intense. I know it was an emotional roller coaster. But sometimes the truest stories are just like that. Complex, transformative, full of nuances. Many of you ask me if I'm going to tell this story from Livia's point of view. What was it like for her to discover this new version of herself? What were the fears, the insecurities, the inner revelations? And honestly, I think so. I think her perspective deserves to be heard as well. So leave it in the comments if you want to see this story through her eyes. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because we have so many more real, deep, and transformative stories to share. Until next time, guys. And remember, sometimes the greatest discoveries about ourselves come through other people. Be open to it.